temporary relocations across state or country borders during the virtual work environment. And what happens when those temporary work solutions move to a more permanent work from somewhere else solution? Companies are interested in large-scale advisory projects where company policies and procedures are developed and documented, and communication plans around those plans are rolled out to their employees, and balancing how to make sure to keep the safety and their employees' satisfaction at the top, but also making sure that they're meeting business and client needs. In my particular role as a global mobility tax professional, I'm taking calls every day from corporate clients in what falls into two basic categories. Either looking forward to managing that the company's compliant with what they're proposing, and then separately looking backwards to ensure that past work situations that were put in place were properly managed and whether there's any corrective action that needs to be taken. So if you think about in that first category, looking forward with what their new rules will look like, and being compliant on a go forward basis. So for example, in our new framework, this company's decided we're going to allow employees to work anywhere in the US they'd like, which is great. Lots of flexibility. We think our employees are going to love that. But on the flip side, how do we manage payroll reporting and withholding for a state where we don't have operations? And what do we do about compensation strategies? If the company had previously tied compensation to a specific location, what happens when someone commanding a Silicon Valley salary moves to Florida or Austin, which has happened quite a lot, we know? Is there a corresponding compensation recalibration? And the flip side of that, the employee will counter, well, I'm doing the same work and performing at the same level and producing the same value to the company. Why does it matter to you where I'm producing this value? And then secondly, in that category of looking backwards, I get calls every week. Looking at taking corrective action for a work situation that either is happening already or was put in place in 2020. You know, a pretty common example that we are wrestling is a supervisor. Oh, by the way, we just heard about this. A supervisor approved for an Australian national who was assigned to Italy to work from France temporarily, but the temporarily turned into what's now more than a year. Is that okay? And what are the rules for income tax for income earned in France? And what are the social tax considerations for this arrangement for both the employee and the employer? And how do we manage the income tax and payroll reporting? And oh, by the way, what if there's incremental tax? Who's going to be responsible for that? So that's kind of how we're spending our days, and all of the inputs that go to this future of work anywhere. And if we move to the next slide, we have heard from clients the whole range of what their new reality will look like. A lot of companies have determined that forced remote work transformation is working for them. And they plan to continue this either in full or in part once things get back to normal, whatever normal turns out to be for all of us. I participated in an industry organization along with Kerwin, the Bay Area Mobility Management, which held their annual conference earlier this month. And over a 3-day virtual conference, there were more than half a dozen individual sessions that covered some flavor of future of work. And it was interesting how different the approach was across this group of companies, and companies of all sizes and industries. And how even with this many sessions, if you think about it, over 3 days, more than 6 of them on work from anywhere, how varied the particular topics were, and just how many different components of the future of work there are to consider for a company. It's important to note that there's no one size fit for every employee or every employer. You know, some employees are happy with working from home, and we see that in surveys taken through the workforce. And their intent, and they fully want that flexibility to continue post-pandemic. And there are those same way who feel they're not as productive working from home, or they miss the work-home boundaries that existed in their old lives with a commute and an office. So if we just move to the next slide, what is the new reality? And it doesn't take more than a quick Google search to see that there is a wide range for how companies will want to move forward. Some of the differences we see are definitely tied to industry needs. I actually spend a fair amount of my time with oil and gas clients, and there's a real push with that constituency that the goal is to get everybody back to the office, back in your seats full time. You may remember seeing the CEO of a refining company who said they were one of the first companies back to the office early summer, and he said they are going to drive demand for their product by getting their own employees back to the office and commuting and buying gas. And so they had a work from work approach. And compare that to my own industry. During tax season, my entire team in years past, we were in the office on Saturdays. We had the mindset that it was busy season and we needed to all be there together in the office on the weekend to be able to get work done efficiently. And those days are over. There's no way, I don't think now, to convince a team that they need to commute and spend the day in the office, no matter what we order in for breakfast or lunch. And compare that in the weeks leading up to the shutdown, we were debating whether or not it was even possible to offer employees the flexibility to work from home one day a week. And now we've spent over a year working every day from home, and proving that it is possible and that the infrastructure exists for us to be able to do that. And so just kind of an overview of what we're seeing in the marketplace from companies and their approach to that. And I'm going to hand off to Crystal now to walk you through a few more points.
Thank you, Stephanie. And it's a pleasure to join everyone today. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get into what are the impacts and implications on the workforce. So Stephanie mentioned expectations around flexibility. We're absolutely seeing this trend in the marketplace. As individuals have gotten accustomed to the new work environment, the future of work isn't so much in the future, it's now and it's today. And with that comes certain expectations of what the future hybrid model looks like for employees. So if we think about the employee value proposition and how different organizations are attracting talent to their organization with the expectation of flexibility, this has become a table stakes. Do I have access and the ability to work from home in different roles? So when you think about how this is shifting the human capital conversation, that's one way it is. Organizations are having to revisit their employee value proposition to entice talent that's already hard to obtain, particularly highly skilled talent in specific industries, needs to revisit the messaging and the benefits that it offers employees, particularly as different workers become accustomed to the new work environment. So what does this really mean for companies, and what do they need to do in response to this growing expectation for flexibility? As you could see on the screen, our workforce survey showed that there definitely is intent and specifics that need to be embedded into the way talent is attracted. So one way to do this is focus on the work, not where you work. So this calls for workforce shaping. And what does workforce shaping mean to us? It's really revisiting existing roles and reconceptualizing the ways in which people work and operate within those roles. So that means looking at agile models, perhaps having gig workers and different flexibility arrangements with contractors and outsourcing. It's really looking at the changes in skills and capabilities that are required, and what does that mean for succession planning and talent. So I want to leave you with kind of 5 T's, our framework when we talk to clients in terms of what does that look for them for the future of work and workforce shaping. So the 5 T's, if you want to grab a pen and take some notes, we start with task. So when we think about the future of work and people working anywhere, what does an individual need to do to accomplish his or her role? How is it measured? And how do you link those tasks to the people performing those tasks? How is this relevant? Certain tasks can be done effectively remotely and at home, whereas as Stephanie mentioned, other tasks require more in-person collaborative work environments. So understanding what the work at hand is the first step to being effective and productive while working anywhere. The second T is type. So, what is the optimal working style for the role? Is it independent? Is it collaborative? Is it creative? So, the type of work also adds to the conversation about what that work environment looks like. It's key to understanding if the individual needs to work independently and solo or if they need to be surrounded by team members. Then you have to think about the time. How long does a task take to actually complete? That also informs what the environment should be as we think about what the future holds. And as everyone is discussing these days, one of the critical T's that we're experiencing in real time today on this platform is the tools. So, does the organization have the resources, the tools, and technology to enable these different tasks to be performed in a work environment? And finally, the technology, because tools aren't just technology. Technology in and of itself and the infrastructure that supports employees is critical to working from anywhere. So those 5 T's are how we kind of start that conversation to support companies in thinking differently about working anywhere. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that even with those 5 T things in place, there's still more work to be done. So Stephanie mentioned how employees, that's from the employer perspective, the 5 T's, how they can support the workforce from a human capital perspective in working remotely with the 5 T's. However, employees have different needs. As Stephanie mentioned, one size does not fit all. You really have to design an experience for the people, the way that they work, their personal events that are taking place, and where they are in their career. And this is where we start to really talk about employee experience and different motivational drivers. So instead of approaching the workforce in a batch process fashion, as if humans are on an assembly line and everyone operates the same in the same manner, you really have to approach employee experience on an individual basis. Now, keeping in mind that there's organizations that have upwards of thousands of individuals, 30,000, 100,000, et cetera, especially in the globally connected environment that we're all working in. So when I say individual meaning segments of workers or populations. What we like to do with our clients is talk about different personas. So are there different clusters of the workforce that have unique needs and preferences and ways of working? And what are those? So really understanding what drives, motivates, and encourages your different workforce populations to produce and perform is critical. This is where we also introduce the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation because different people not only work in different ways, but require different levels of support, particularly in the remote environment. If we think about working parents, there's different requirements and flexibility in arrangements that employers may want to offer. If we think about those with disability needs, both apparent and unapparent, when we think about working remotely, there's different requirements. Again, thinking about the 5 T's, what are the tools and technologies that can be provided to that employee subset or segment to make sure that they're most effective when working anywhere? So, in summation, I would encourage organizations to keep those 5 T's in mind as they think about supporting their employees in a work environment. And again, those tasks, the type of work, the time it takes to get it done, the tools to support your employees, and the technology to enable and equip those employees. And for the employees, I think about being very vocal about your experience needs, whether that's escalating to leaders, whether that's more clearly communicating to colleagues, keeping in mind we're all humans while we're working in a virtual environment and trying to be engaged and productive and very present. We're also working in different environments. Not everyone is in a home office isolated. Some people have roommates. Some people are sharing their work environment with small kids while kind of going to school from home. So all these aspects really make the employee experience real, and it makes the human capital considerations something that organizations need to be very intentional and very focused in addressing as we think about the future of work. I'll turn it back over to Stephanie so we can transition.
Thanks, Crystal. Thanks for going through that. And if we just move to the next slide there, I think Crystal covered this really well. There are lots of considerations that companies need to undertake right now in order to provide a deliberate experience for their employees and for their career development. And so now we've given you kind of a flavor of what a lot of different companies are thinking about. And now I'm going to hand off to Kerwin for him to share his extensive experience and particular experience with his company.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Crystal, I've taken the notes of the 5 T's. Thank you. So this is me. While I don't trace my roots in Texas, a lot of what I do in the present and recent past involves bringing families to set up roots in Texas for HPE. So with that, let me start. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you, to share a journey that hopefully could inspire your own. My journey spans over 20 years, actually. I calculated earlier, it's nearing 25 this year, leading to my current role. I signed my first offer letter before I received my degree in engineering. I have been fortunate to progress from local to regional to global roles. I have lived through all of these flex work and remote work arrangements for almost 20 years. Distance nor time zone represented any limitations to fulfill my aspirations. Fact, in HP's 80 years, my current role has always resided in the US. I have not really seen a lot of mobility leaders emerge from Asia, much less be allowed to perform and run the global program from here. And yes, it is past 1 a.m. here, and that's how much I support UTD. So I take on that pressure to sort of earn the privilege every day to be in this role, to not just carry on traditional ways of doing things and to keep chasing relevance. In the words of Hamilton, I am not throwing away my shot. Well, that's also good advice for vaccine-wise. So if we can go next slide, please. Okay, so let me set some context in terms of what's happening now and how they will affect the path forward. Well, number one, we will see a more balanced view on efficiency versus resiliency, moving from how effectively can I run my organization or simply or my supply chain to how resilient is my organization or my supply chain. Whether it is shared services, COE hubs, global providers, companies have been hurt in many ways. Whether it is the weakness of local infrastructure in traditional back office hubs, or companies' inability to mobilize talent during the pandemic to continue doing business. We had those challenges, especially in the early days, as we had to figure out ways to reach hospitals, trying to scale their operations with IT infrastructure, or helping schools as they go full remote at that point in time, or other businesses we support who all of a sudden required increased IT capacity. I believe the macro level trends will dictate what happens to our industry. Dynamics are changing, but talent mobility is still needed. The flow of people, trade, and capital have slowed, but the business environment remains globally connected. Workforce planning will be strategic. It will be compliance driven and global. And because of all of these, talent mobility continues to be critical to workforce strategy. The mindset of nationalism and protectionism has encouraged a bias towards self-reliance, focus on local talent to mitigate local unemployment rates, review of free trade agreements, and immigration protocols. We saw all of those prior to the pandemic, and it will be elevated afterwards. I believe trade and investments will still dictate where talent flows. Governments will never be able to entice investments from corporate by handicapping them on foreign talent they can bring in to establish and grow their business. Next slide, please. So here's where I think we will be. As a community, through multiple roundtables and benchmarking sessions, we have likely focused on the same things, so I would not spend the time on what was there and instead focus on what's next. I believe that talent mobility as a strategy can be applied in many ways. During good times, we have seen people move to develop professionally, to grow their business, and to address talent gaps. I also believe that as a strategy, talent mobility can also save jobs, reduce cost for the business. Where we move talent from high to medium cost location, domestic or cross borders, where we support global footprint discussions or alter our mobility investment packages to move the needle on our labor pyramid. We have also started to understand our dependence on foreign talent for specific business groups and specific job families, so we can understand where we need to build local talent pipeline, where we need to invest in immigration, and where we need to place our advocacy dollars. Just like how we have seen businesses during the pandemic pivot their strengths to be applied in other areas, like how car companies started doing ventilators or airline workers be tapped to do contact tracing. Early on, our mobility team have pivoted to own a lot more of the new work arrangements discussions within our company. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll share that with you. The global pandemic has changed the way we live and work. Most of our team members say they feel more productive working at home. They like the flexibility of being able to choose where they work. And they like to leverage the office for social and cultural activities. So we have taken this as an opportunity for us to reimagine what the future of work at HPE looks like. Edge is anywhere one may work and collaborate outside of an HPE office. The office experience will look and feel different. It will be a culture and collaboration hub. It is a place to unplug. We are rolling this out globally, and we have started last quarter of 2020. The intent is by mid of this year, which is coming up, we would have over 70% of our population classified as remote. And then there's a very few population, because we still have factories to run, task tools, all of those that must be performed on site. So we still have office workers and factory workers that have to be on site, but 70+% of the global population will be remote, aside from those who are full-time teleworkers. Again, thank you for the privilege of your time. More power to our partners from the university, Professor Hubert and Mike, as they bring our community together, harness the generosity of our spirit as we offer inspiration to each other. I believe we are ready for questions.
Well, thank you, Kerwin, and thank you to Crystal and Stephanie as well. What a refreshing set of remarks and insights from your organizations and beyond. We do have some interesting questions and comments, but allow me to take advantage of my position as the moderator. So I do have one very strategic question. If imagine I am 30 years younger, right? So I'm a young student, I'm participating in this event, and I have always been fascinated by this global career opportunity. However, with recent pandemics, border closures, immigration controls, I'm very discouraged. Then on top of that, geopolitical tensions, nationalism, as Kerwin alluded to, so I'm further discouraged. So I'm hearing conflicting messages. Evidently, our panelists have been encouraging us to consider this, but at the same time, I'm a young student struggling to find an entry-level job. Hopefully, I'll have a stronger and more prosperous career going forward. So what is your reaction to this kind of tension I'm going through internally as a young student or young professional? Thank you.
I'm happy to take a first stab at that. So my job as a global mobility professional relies on companies continuing to have a global presence. So I'm acutely aware of how things have shifted in the recent experience. Although I have seen a resurgence of assignments, people going out on assignment, I would say do your research. So if you're really interested in having a global career, you need to do the research and find a company that supports that goal. So look where they have operations, look where their revenue is coming from outside of the US, and look at their leadership team and whether that leadership team has worked in in many locations across the world, because that, to me, that says that the company values that experience of working outside of your home location. I will tell you, I feel very strongly about getting that experience of working outside of the US. I did it very early in my career. I was an expat to Mexico City. I remember I was pretty young, and when I told family members or friends, well, I'm going on assignment, I'm going to Mexico, and they'd say, you're going to New Mexico? What are you going to do in New Mexico? No, I'm going to Mexico City, Mexico. And so it was a fantastic experience. I think the work that I did there in the foreign location in terms of the business, I count those years as dog years in my career. I learned so much. And on a personal basis, I met my husband. We're still married. So, by all accounts, it was a very successful expat posting. But I would tell you that do your research and make sure that you're picking a company that values that global experience and expects it of their leaders.
Great. Anyone else to add? Crystal or Kerwin?
Crystal, go ahead.
I absolutely agree with Stephanie. I'd say from when I think about candidates who are seeking employment, I mentioned the value proposition. So really understanding not only what you hope to get from the experience, but also what the organization can provide as well. I think of employment as a relationship. From a human capital perspective, we really describe it. Not only do you want the career opportunities to learn and grow and develop, but the organization obviously now has greater access to talent all around the world. So I would say, don't let the boundaries and borders limit you, just like we're not letting talking through a screen limit us today and how organizations are working in this new environment. So I'd say really consider where you want to go in your career journey and what that career path is, and identify the organizations that offer it. And if that has some variety or flair to it in terms of geography, then don't be limited by that.
My response, I'll give two perspectives. Number one is I've taken inspiration from athletes, and growing up, I knew at the start of my career, I want to be the best locally. You rule that at some point, I want to be the best at the region level. And then you rule that at some point, I only have one life to live. I have to go for it. I want to understand if I can make it and be that global leader, coming from, again, exceeding expectation, third world, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my encouragement for others. Number one. Number two, career-wise, set that aside. Think about where you have been. I know the student population of UTD, Center for Global Business, has a lot of foreign students. They come over to the US, a huge population come over to the US and take up university. And the reason why I think a lot of people do that is because they know when they go through mobility via university, it opens up more doors, more opportunities, access to more expertise. It's the same thing for career mobility, moving across borders. Again, I don't look like I'm from the Philippines. I'm born in the Philippines, immigrant parents, China, Manila, Singapore. Mobility has changed the trajectory of our life. And hopefully it will change the trajectory of the life of my daughter because of access to education and everything else. So for me, daring to cross borders, regardless of geopolitical challenges, regardless of all the adversity, is way worth it. It makes life more fulfilling. That's it, makes this journey way more fun.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Kerwin, if I can quote you from your talk, I made copious notes. One sentence you said, correct me if I misquoted you, you said, trade and investment will still dictate talent flows. Am I quoting you correctly?
Yes.
Okay, that's very encouraging, so thank you. And let me open it up to Dustin. So Dustin will raise some questions on behalf of the audience. So here you go, Dustin.
So we do have some questions. The first one is for Crystal, and that is, what criteria has KPMG used to segment the employee as part of the process to design great employee experiences?
Great question, and it's one I oftentimes get, and I'll say it varies by client and by industry. So when we think of employee experience, we think of experience broadly, right? You have your digital experience, and that's what a lot of people tend to think through, just because employees are consumers as well, and we're all used to interacting on our platforms to go shopping and to buy things and make life more convenient, especially in this remote environment. So there's the digital experience, but when we think of the other aspects of experience, we think about the cultural side of experience, and we think about, again, what is most effective in terms of enabling the employee to be productive and to succeed. So one way we think about segmenting is based on need. So what do different employee groups need, irrespective of their title? Because if we think about where people are in their career journey, you can be a director or you can be a more junior staff, and you still have the same needs from the organization because different people are starting from different places. We think about segmenting people, about learning styles and working styles. So in the case of a current client, we're looking at some of their populations are more introverted. So what does that mean in terms of how they communicate with their leadership if their natural disposition is to be more introverted? That's where we also think about the cultural aspect. So when we think about segmenting some of our populations, when I've had some diversity engagements or projects, there's cultural aspects when we think about, you mentioned, Kerwin, immigrants. So I'm hearing from the immigrant workers that their experience at certain companies it's different. And how does that translate into how their managers can better support them? How does that translate into how HR can provide specific benefits that are more targeted to the immigrant population? So we really take a variety of cuts. It depends on what the organization is trying to get to in terms of its business objectives, in terms of its culture aspirations, in terms of its diversity goals. We can segment the workforce in a variety of ways, but it's not always as clear cut as where do I live and what's my level. We take a more human-centered view and really look at what does the person need to be not only productive for the organization, but to be satisfied and be happy as an individual. Because at the end of the day, you can work, and produce, but are you happy where you are, and do you feel personally fulfilled in the organization? So that's a long answer to say there's a variety of ways, and not to limit the way we think about employees, because humans are complicated and complex.
And Dustin, if I may add on to that, coming from, again, once upon a time, I managed a talent acquisition organization that was hiring 37,000 a year. At that point, we provide perspective to the business, to HR, in terms of, again, at some point, all of us are competitors. We're competing for talent. If I can win based on the experience we offer, based on investments we're making on the employee experience, whatever that is. Once upon a time, I saw us compete when I was at Intel. We started doing 4-day work week. This was before 2000. 4-day work week, 3-4-day type compressed work week. People like that. People would sign your offer for that. So it depends on market. It depends on where you want to be. Again, differentiate yourself versus market to be able to win. Because at the end of the day, HR is also about attract, retain, develop, and hopefully motivate talent.
Awesome answer, guys. The next question is actually directed to you, Kerwin, and that is, how can managers contribute to create an environment that favors global trade and, as a consequence, global talent mobility?
I'd like to think they have a lot of accountability for that. At the end of the day, the rest of HR can provide them the infrastructure, but culture, building culture is about what everybody does, manager do every day. So specific actions on how they get to promote that, and sharing some examples of what we're doing, what we're about to do. A few things. Number one, every time I did this when I was competing for to build my HR hub in Manila. Every time I saw a requisition and people were hiring in whatever location they're most comfortable with, I would go to the manager and compete for that rec. I'll tell them I'll share with you talent that's available, and that we can bring to the hub. Longer term, etc., cheaper, faster, we can land this. And then I picked up a lot of those inspiration. Now I'm working on a project uh, that puts up a few use cases, see if this connects. Number one, I'm making a proposal to the manager by looking at analytics. For jobs, for example, that they send to a headhunter and we're paying 25, 28% of annual base, I can tell them I can fill up that role faster, cheaper if you fly somebody from A to B, because the one-way transfer cost is cheaper than 28% of that annual base. And the employee, culture-wise, engagement-wise, they perform better, they stay longer. So we've built a few use cases like that where we get to promote culture, promote performance, promote retention, at the same time promote talent mobility.
Thank you for your response, Kerwin. The next question is also for you, and that is, in terms of growth with HPE, has opportunity for growth within the company slowed down due to the shift to work from home?
I'll give a broader response based on what I've seen in my career. And slowdown for me is tied to business condition, tough times, what we went through, periods of uncertainty last year. I've seen a few downturns in my career, post 9/11, financial crisis, etc. And during those times, the tendency of corporates freeze recs. And that's when I go aggressive, because I know, again, traditional managers, they would prefer to hire and they have jobs. That's when I start raising my hand. And that's how I got to move a lot of jobs because of those downturns. I kept raising my hand. I will do that job, stretch assignment, stretch role. I don't need the formality, but when things open up, then you're more competitive than everybody else who are waiting for the formality to apply for that job. So, and I've seen the same within HPE. I've had direct reports who are able to move, and now they're leading their own programs. I think it's all about the culture of the company, and I know 80 years at HPE, I've seen a lot of people who have been around 20, 30 years. And for me, that's a sign that people gravitate to culture that nurtures their aspirations and values, their contribution, and allows them to progress over time.
Maybe allow me to jump in, and Stephanie and Crystal, you may also comment on this question from your organization or from other organizations with which you work on this downturn situation, in a post-COVID environment.
Yeah, I think Kerwin had great points there, and I've seen that play out across other organizations. I kind of just past the pandemic start, in the summertime, we saw a lot of companies that did have some restructuring, and it did allow for some opportunities for people with, depending on where you were in your career, to move into different jobs. So we definitely did see that. While that restructuring did create some opportunities for moving forward, if you were able to time your raising your hand for those kinds of advancement. For sure, I saw that across several companies.
Good times, bad times, the opportunity presents presents itself. And for the students, again, listening, you're not, there's a lot of things we cannot control. We control, right, our own initiative, raising our hand, having those conversations, awkward, difficult, uncomfortable, that's fine. That's how good things happen. One more anecdote, if you let me. I no TA experience. I got into that by raising my hand. The recruitment manager for Manila left, and I approached the leader and the next level manager, who happens to be running mobility and everything else. I told him, let me do that job. For as long as I meet your targets, you don't hire the person. And then it went on and on until I got to run the region. Raising your hand. Dustin?
The next question that we have deals with kind of accessibility for talent from developing countries. Question's phrased a little strangely, but how feasible is it to find talent from developing countries, not necessarily only developed countries?
I'll take a shot.
I would, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Chris.
Stephanie.
I was just going to say, in my experience, it really depends on the company and where they have operations. So I have had the opportunity to work with companies that both are have a framework where they're sending US employees overseas to overseas operations, but they also are very keen to have employees in those non-US operations coming to the US and getting the headquarters experience. So I've seen it, it's very common. I've been very fortunate to see it. I've seen it go in both directions. I've worked with employees who have come to the US from Angola, Kazakhstan, Nigeria, Indonesia, Venezuela. I mean, you name it, India, of course, you name it. I feel like I have seen that, and it's been a very good experience. And I think that the companies recognize that ability to share that corporate culture by supporting those assignments. So I reject the notion that it's only for developed countries, because that has not been my experience at all.
Thank you for your response, Stephanie.
But Crystal, sorry, did you want to add something, Crystal? Because
Stephanie hit the nail on the head. I mean, I
Sure.
wholeheartedly agree in terms of the talent, and what you can get isn't limited by location.
Okay, great. Dustin.
The next question that we have is, how important are cross-cultural communication competencies for future global workers?
If we're talking about competencies, I do think that having awareness, particularly when we talk to different clients, if they have, like Stephanie mentioned, operations in different areas, and you're working with different customers or stakeholders, or even your own colleagues are across different borders, I think having some level of cultural competence, if we think about a skill set and business acumen and ability to communicate in different ways based on what your objective and who you're communicating, I think is critical. If we just think about human capital competencies, I encourage others to expand specifically as we talk about global mobility, but from a talent perspective, I'd say that's a valuable competency to have, particularly if you're working for a global organization.
I see that path from that crosses from the academe, how we prepare students for, again, to lead a career that allows them to grow globally. Starts there, continuing education. There's a lot of opportunities across multiple companies who knows and values building that type of talent. They invest in cross-cultural stuff, how you persuade, communicate, influence cross cultures, work dealing with other managing conflict, all of that. So there's a lot of investment, a lot of in that space, because that's an acknowledged need for development.
Allow me to go back to Crystal. Crystal, your unit is human capital advising. Now we have a little bit of time, so I would want to ask you, how would you define human capital? The reason I'm asking this question is, to me, human capital is a relatively recent academic jargon. And we in academia struggle with this definition. My definition may be different from yours, and your definition may be different from someone else's, but from a practical standpoint, since you already have this unit and you're a manager in this unit with the title Human Capital Advising, how would you define it? And then, tell us what you think. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So I would say I don't have kind of one sentence. I can talk about what we do within the space. I know different organizations define it in a different way. It's really looking at kind of the talent needs and implications of your variety of workforces. So if we think about organization design, so is the organization set up to deliver the work? Are the people who are delivering the work, do they have the skill set, capabilities, and competencies to deliver the work? If you think about the HR technologies that support the delivery of the work, are those in place? If we think about the HR function, and is that function kind of equipped to provide the services that are needed and the tools and technology? And we also think about learning and development. So if we think about training, so it's one thing to have certain responsibilities and skills outlined on a job description, but is the training and learning and development infrastructure in place? So that way, when the employee is within the organization, they're able to be upskilled and have succession planning and career pathing in place. So the human capital kind of organization looks at the end-to-end employment life cycle, from onboarding and first attracting talent to developing the talent to ensuring that the talent can perform, even to exiting the organization. Because when employees leave the organization, they are ambassadors of their experience. They are the ones who tell their friends and colleagues about their experience and or refer them to the organization. So that end-to-end employment lifecycle is really what human capital advisory not only advises on, but provides support and guidance around. Did that answer your question? I know, Kerwin, you have.
Sure, that's great. But if Kerwin and Stephanie have anything to add, please jump in. We're good then. Dustin, going back to you. You have a couple more questions.
The next question we have is, what advice would you give students in terms of starting a developing career at KPMG as well as HPE?
So I can obviously take the KPMG question. I've been with the firm since 1999, so a long time. So I clearly feel very strongly about the organization and for a destination for a career and having a meaningful one and developed one. So first of all, I would say to a student, is to do the job, like really, whichever, whether it's advisory, tax, or audit, whatever it is, really learn the job, know your craft. So spend time studying the work that you're doing. But then, when you go to work for a big firm, one of the advantages of that is that it's a big firm and there's some of everything pretty much. So early in your career, spend some time trying out something else. I tell any of the folks that work on my team, I never say no to a transfer within the organization. It's important to me that people are doing the work that they want to do. And I feel that KPMG makes a real investment in the people that we bring into the firm, and it's important to us that we find a way for them to do what it is they want to do within the organization. So that's the advice I would give to my starting out as a student self.
I'll give the advice from the perspective of when I was doing a lot of university recruitment, what I'd be looking for. curiosity is something that I think it's not valued too much, but I like that. I like curiosity. I like hunger. I like, you know, that appetite of wanting to do and willingness to do and eagerness to do is good. The second part for me, as you start and as you try a few different things, at some point, understanding your why, the purpose that you're trying to fulfill, what you're trying to build, something bigger than the next job. Understanding that for yourself is very important, because that will give you a lot of misery or satisfaction, fulfillment along the way. And then for me, the last part is what really helped me along the way was a lot of mentors. I've surrounded myself with role models, people who I admire, who are successful, next in line type, uh, and then mentors. I understood, maybe not too early, where I want to develop, what I want to develop, and I had to keep looking for people who are really good at that, and kept finding opportunities to spend time. So just all of that.
And I'll add on to that as well. If we think about just the journey, as someone who has changed industries and careers, I'd say don't be afraid to try new things. So as you come out of university, if you find that you thought you had a straight path and you're trying a specific role and you find that you're no longer learning or growing or developing, it's okay to try something completely different and find your footing. Because I think starting out, you need that exposure to know what you want to do long term. And I'd say it's never too late to pivot in your kind of career journey.
Hubert, your hands up.
Yes, it is, and thank you so much for valuable advice to our students. We have a number of students in our audience, and all of you have touched on this through different points. Kerwin was talking about finding your why, making sure that you raise your hand and volunteer for certain things, and Crystal talked about human-centered view of the company. But what worked 2 years ago, until 2 years ago, let's say, was one set of things. But now, how can students create this path to leadership by working from anywhere? How can you raise your hand by working from anywhere, virtually? Because we're going to be in a different model, hybrid or virtual. How can you truly raise that hand through working from anywhere?
I focus on my, whoever that target audience customer is. So during the pandemic, nobody told me I will own something. I kept raising my hand. I approach, again, understanding your audience, what will help them and harm them, what motivates them, focus on them, put them at the center of everything. And then I approach them based on what will motivate them. So I told them, I want to own this. Then I own that.
It's a good question, and it's tricky. I don't think anyone's actually completely figured it out or solved it. In my mind, I think that a lot of the ways that we've been able to pivot and work remotely effectively is because of the relationships we already had. I work on a team for the most part, there were only a handful of new people. So we already knew each other. We already, kind of knew how to work with one another. And so we were able to take that from the office and make it virtual. So in the short term, that works, right? But then what happens over a longer period of time when you don't have those relationships to rely on and to pull from? And so we had a number of people on our team who literally started in January and were in the office for just a matter of weeks before we went to a remote environment. And I think about them, I worry about them, I worry about their experience. I don't think it's sustainable for us to continue working full-time remote forever. Like at some point we won't have those relationships to draw from and to be able to work as effectively as we have. So I really don't have an answer except that it's a definite issue that will have to be addressed. And I think it's also important for companies to take that into account as they look at the employee experience and what that looks like.
I do think the concept here is social capital. We are spending social capital, but we're not building new ones. And that is a potential issue going forward. No, I do think this is a concern. So how do you build social capital in a non-social, non-physical, non-in-person environment, right? I think that is a challenge going forward. Got to keep that in mind. Dustin, do you have anything else to add, or are we almost done?
I think the next big question that we have is,
okay, last one.
How do you pick a mentor?
I know what my challenges, difficulties, weaknesses, or where I want to keep harnessing my strength. I find the right person, and then I find ways to be introduced, or have enough courage. Introduce yourself, tell them why. You'll be surprised. A lot of people would be willing to take you up.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say ask, understand what it is you're looking for and you need. And I think finding someone that can offer that to you, and either that you have an existing relationship or that you feel comfortable with. Because to Stephanie's point, right, we are talking about relationships and humans. So getting a mentor simply for their title isn't the way to go, but it's really looking for someone that you're trying to learn from, or that you want to be like in some aspects, that can offer you some unique advice based on their experience that you can learn from.
Yeah, and I would tell you, and the advice I give people and I follow for myself is, I want a mentor that's going to make me sweat. I don't need somebody that's going to agree with everything that I think or everything that I do, and somebody that's going to pat me on the back and say, "Gosh, you did that fantastic." I want somebody that's going to say, that's going to give me hard tasks and that are going to give me to-dos that really stretch my comfort level. So in my career, I have had great success with that. But it's not easy. So, you know, you need to put in your mindset, there's a difference between having someone you admire and you want to be friends with, and having someone who's going to mentor you and really push you.
Totally agree. I learned the most from tough love than the people who just kept encouraging you. Yeah.
All right, on that note of tough love, thanks very much to all of you. Thank you for your time. And especially to Kerwin, now you are allowed to sleep. Well, Crystal can go get lunch, and Stephanie will start your new day. So, all right. So thanks very much, guys. We really appreciate you coming to join us. And a little bit of information tomorrow at the same time, we will have another show as part of the Joint-Academe Speaker Series. All right. Thanks very much on behalf of Center for Global Business. Thank the panelists one more time, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow and also on Thursday as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.